Girl runs to Keanu Reeves on red carpet. Her confession made him shut down the event. At a glamorous Hollywood gala, all eyes were on Keanu Reeves as he made his way down the red carpet. The evening took an unexpected turn when a desperate young girl broke through security, clinging to his leg and pleading for help. What she revealed to him in that moment prompted Keanu to take an extraordinary step. He shut down the entire event. The entrance to the majestic plaza exuded luxury, with its towering glass doors reflecting the golden hues of the setting sun. Keanu Reeves arrived through the VIP entrance, adjusting the cufflinks on his tailored blue suit, a subtle but deliberate gesture to shake off the unease of being the center of attention once again. The lobby was a hive of energy, with staff guiding guests through the opulent venue. Keanu's gaze swept the room, taking in the glittering chandeliers, polished marble floors, and the brass sign pointing toward the VIP lounge upstairs. Choosing the grand staircase over the crowded elevator, Keanu ascended the plush carpeted steps, nodding politely to guests who greeted him along the way. At the top, a staff member opened the frosted glass doors to reveal the VIP lounge, a seamless blend of classic Hollywood glamour and modern luxury. The soft glow of chandeliers illuminated clusters of movie stars, tech moguls, and socialites engaging in lively conversations. The air carried the scent of expensive perfumes mingled with gourmet hors d'oeuvres, while a jazz quartet's melodies wove gently through the chatter. Though familiar with the spotlight, Keanu felt a momentary hesitation. He was both a participant and an observer in this surreal world, a duality he had never fully embraced. A young staffer approached him with a tray of drinks, offering options of champagne, whiskey, or a signature cocktail inspired by the evening's theme. "Whiskey's fine, thanks," Keanu replied warmly, accepting the crystal tumbler and finding a quieter corner to settle in. From his vantage point, he observed the room, a director gesticulating animatedly with a cocktail in hand, a billionaire leaning close to a supermodel, and countless other interactions that painted a picture of Hollywood's elite. As Keanu sipped his whiskey, a stir near the entrance caught his attention. The crowd parted, and a confident man strode purposefully toward him, a young girl trailing hesitantly behind. "Keanu Reeves," the man greeted, extending his hand with a practiced charm. "Victor Langham. It's a pleasure to finally meet you." Keanu shook his hand, his tone polite but measured. "Nice to meet you, Victor. Thank you for organizing this wonderful event." Victor's smile widened as he introduced his daughter. "And this is Sophie. She's been eager to meet you all night." Sophie, clad in a denim jacket and jeans, looked up at Keanu with wide, admiring eyes. "You're Keanu Reeves," she whispered, awe evident in her voice. Keanu crouched down to her level, his expression softening. "That's me," he said gently. "And who are you?" "I'm Sophie," she replied shyly. "I've seen all your movies. You're my favorite actor." Keanu chuckled warmly. "Thank you, Sophie. That's so kind of you. Do you have a favorite movie?" Before she could answer, Victor interjected, his hand tightening on her shoulder. "Let's not bother Mr. Reeves too much, sweetheart. He's very busy tonight." "It's no bother at all," Keanu reassured, his gaze lingering on Sophie, whose initial excitement seemed to waver under her father's firm tone. Victor suggested a quick photo, and despite Sophie's subdued demeanor, Keanu knelt beside her, offering a reassuring smile as Victor snapped a picture. Throughout the evening, Keanu couldn't shake the unease from his interaction with Victor and Sophie. Something about their dynamic didn't sit right. When he later encountered Sophie alone in a quiet hallway, looking lost and anxious, his instincts told him this was more than a fleeting moment of discomfort. "Daughter, and it ends here. Call the authorities."
"Now?"
The command in Keanu's voice left no room for argument. The guards sprang into action, one moving to alert the authorities while another kept a close eye on Victor, who was still seething with anger but now visibly deflated. Keanu turned back to Sophie, who was clutching his arm tightly, her face streaked with tears but showing a glimmer of hope. He knelt down to her level once more, his voice soft and reassuring. "Sophie, you're safe now. I promise. No one is going to hurt you again." As the sirens echoed in the distance, signaling the arrival of the police. Keanu stayed by Sophie's side, offering her the protection and comfort she had so desperately sought. Certainly. The guards finally nodded. One spoke into his radio to initiate the event shutdown, while another pulled out a phone to call 911. Victor, realizing the severity of the situation, began to panic. "You can't do this," he shouted. "Do you have any idea who I am? I'll ruin you, Reeves. You'll never work in this town again." Keanu remained unfazed by the threats, keeping himself between Victor and Sophie. He looked down at the young girl, who was gazing up at him with a mixture of fear and gratitude. "It's okay, Sophie," he said softly. "You've been very brave for speaking up. You're safe now. We're going to get you and your mom the help you need." He glanced at Victor, whose face had drained of all color at the sound of the approaching sirens. "You can't do this." Victor yelled again. "Do you know who I am? I'll ruin you, Reeves. You're finished in this town." As the sirens grew louder, the backstage area was in full motion. Security guards held their positions around Victor, while event staff scrambled to manage the sudden shutdown of the gala. Keanu stayed close to Sophie, his protective instincts heightened. Victor, momentarily subdued by the shock, suddenly regained his voice. His tone shifted from anger to desperate damage control. "This is all a misunderstanding," he said, forcing a nervous laugh. "It's just a domestic issue. You know, all families face struggles when dressing up their kids for events." Keanu knelt down to Sophie's level, his voice gentle but firm. "Sophie, you've been incredibly brave," he reassured her. "I promise we'll find your mother together. But first, I need to talk to the police. Can you stay right here with this security guard while I do that?" Sophie nodded, her eyes wide but trusting. Keanu gestured to a nearby guard, who positioned himself protectively near her. As the first officers entered the ballroom foyer, Keanu approached them. His voice steady, he began to detail the evening's events, explaining Victor's abusive behavior, Sophie's bruises, and his suspicions about Barbara Langham's whereabouts. The lead officer, a seasoned detective, listened intently before speaking to his team. "I want a full sweep of this building," the detective ordered. "Find Mrs. Langham and get Child Protective Services here, ASAP." Turning back to Keanu, the detective asked, "Mr. Reeves, did you witness any physical abuse directly?" Keanu nodded grimly. "I prevented Mr. Langham from striking Sophie just before you arrived." "And the bruises on her arms? They're clearly not from normal childhood play." As Keanu finished his statement, a commotion near the restroom area caught everyone's attention. Two officers were leading Victor out now, handcuffed and looking far less composed than earlier. His designer suit was rumpled, and he stumbled, the effects of whatever substances he had taken earlier evident. Victor's eyes locked onto Keanu, a mixture of fury and desperation in his gaze. "You'll regret this, Reeves," he slurred. "I've got friends in high places. Your career is over." Keanu remained impassive, turning his attention back to the detective. "Sophie mentioned that her father often hit her mother," Keanu said. "I think we need to search every room in this building." The detective nodded, already mobilizing his team. "We're on it. In the meantime, we need to find a safe place for the girl." Just then, Sophie's voice rang out, filled with hope and desperation.
"Mom.
I want my mom." Keanu turned to see Sophie pointing at a nervous-looking staff member who had just entered the area. "Please," Keanu said, approaching the man. "We need to find Barbara Langham. Do you know where she is?" The staff member hesitated, his eyes darting nervously between Keanu and the police. "Mr. Langham, he didn't want anyone to know," the man stammered. "Victor is with the police now," Keanu said firmly. "The event is over. Mrs. Langham needs to be informed of what's happened. Please, tell us where she is." Finally, the staff member relented and led Keanu, Sophie, and a police officer down a secluded corridor. Using an access card, he unlocked a private room tucked away from the main event areas. As the door swung open, they found Barbara Langham sitting alone, impeccably dressed for an appearance she'd never make. Her eyes widened in surprise and confusion at the sight before her. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "Is it time for the photo shoot?" Before anyone could respond, Sophie broke free from Keanu's gentle hold and ran to her mother. "Mom," she cried, throwing her arms around Barbara. Barbara's initial confusion quickly gave way to relief as she embraced her daughter. But as the reality of the situation sank in, her eyes filled with tears. "Oh, Sophie," she whispered, "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." As Barbara held her daughter close, she looked up at Keanu and the police officer, her voice shaky but determined. "What happened? Where's Victor?" Keanu stepped forward, his voice gentle. "Mrs. Langham, your husband has been arrested. Sophie told us everything." Barbara's face crumpled, a mix of relief and anguish washing over her. "I didn't know how to get out," she said. "He kept us isolated. Said it was to protect his image, but it just got worse and worse." The police officer stepped forward, his tone both professional and compassionate. "Mrs. Langham, we'll need to take your statement, but first, we'd like to have you and your daughter checked out at the hospital. It's standard procedure in cases like this." Barbara nodded, keeping Sophie close to her side. "Of course. Whatever you need. I want to press charges. This has to stop. Just look at Sophie's arms," the officer added. Sophie, summoning all the courage she had left, looked the detective in the eye. "Several times every day," she said. "Sometimes he uses his belt or his show stick." Barbara rose to her feet, regret heavy in her voice. "I should have called the authorities sooner, before it got this far. But I stayed silent, afraid of losing our family's reputation and Sophie's future. Now everything changes." The detective nodded, assuring her that her statement would be recorded officially. As they prepared to leave the room, Barbara turned to Keanu, her eyes filled with gratitude. "Mr. Reeves, thank you. Thank you for believing Sophie, for standing up to Victor. I don't know how we'll ever repay you." Keanu shook his head, a small, sad smile on his face. "There's no need for thanks, Mrs. Langham. I'm just glad you and Sophie are safe now. The important thing is focusing on your recovery and safety." As the police escorted Barbara, Keanu, and Sophie through the hotel corridors, the full weight of the evening's events began to settle in. The once bustling halls of the majestic hotel were eerily quiet now, the guests having been escorted outside, leaving only the occasional radio chatter from the officers. They reached the hotel lobby, where more officers and paramedics were gathered. A detective approached Barbara. "Mrs. Langham," he began gently, "your husband has been arrested, but he's being taken to the hospital first. He was found in no condition to make a statement, likely due to substance abuse." Barbara's grip on Sophie tightened just slightly as she weighed her options. After a brief pause, she lifted her chin, newfound resolve in her eyes. "I couldn't care less about that man right now," she said firmly. "We'll follow your standard procedure and go to the hospital, but I don't want to see him. Better yet, if we can, let's go straight to the police station and have Sophie's wounds treated there." "Sophie and I have stayed silent for far too long." The detective nodded, respect evident in his eyes. "Very well, we'll arrange for transport to the station immediately. The medical team will tend to Sophie there." As they waited for the police vehicle, Barbara turned to Keanu, her voice trembling slightly. "Mr. Reeves, I don't know how to thank you for what you've done. You've given us a chance at a new life." Keanu shook his head, his expression gentle. "There's no need for thanks, Mrs. Langham. I'm just glad I could help. The important thing now is focusing on your recovery and safety." Sophie, who had been quiet since their reunion, suddenly spoke up. "Are you coming with us, Mr. Reeves?" Keanu crouched down to Sophie's level, offering a small smile. "I'm afraid I can't come with you right now, Sophie. The police need to talk to you and your mom alone. But I promise I'll check in on you both soon, okay?" Sophie nodded, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and hope. "You promise?" "I promise," Keanu affirmed, his voice soft but resolute. As Barbara and Sophie were led to the waiting police car, Keanu provided his contact information to the investigating officers. "If there's anything else I can do to help, please don't hesitate to call," he told them. One of the officers, a seasoned detective, pulled Keanu aside. "Mr. Reeves, I want to commend you for your actions tonight. Not many people would have the courage to stand up to someone like Langham, especially given his status in the industry. Keanu nodded solemnly. I just did what I hope anyone would do in that situation. No child should have to endure what Sophie has been through. The detective's expression turned serious. You should be prepared for some backlash. Langham has a lot of powerful friends, and they might not take kindly to his arrest. I understand, Keanu replied, his resolve unwavering. But I'd make the same choice again in a heartbeat. As the police car carrying Barbara and Sophie pulled away, Keanu stood at the hotel entrance, watching until it disappeared from view. The night air was cool on his face, a stark contrast to the heated emotions of the evening. He knew the coming days and weeks would be challenging. There would be statements to make, possibly legal proceedings, and undoubtedly professional consequences to face. But as he thought of Sophie's brave face and Barbara's grateful eyes, he felt a sense of peace settle over him. Keanu turned to head back into the hotel, where his publicist and manager would be waiting with a barrage of questions and concerns. But before he stepped inside, he paused, taking a deep breath and looking up at the night sky. In that moment, he made a silent vow to himself. He would use his platform and influence not just for entertainment, but to make a real difference in the world. Because sometimes, the most important roles we play aren't the ones captured on film, but the ones we choose in real life when faced with injustice.